Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership webinar series, where we're focusing on leading change in dynamic environments. My name is Erin Forey, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. The title of our webinar today is We're Ready for a Change, Preparing for New Technology. And with us is Ryan Larison, who is a longtime forensic science practitioner, lab director, and quality manager, who is now serving as the Assistant Director in the Information and Technology Division of the Michigan State Police. And today's talk will be interesting in that Ryan will be bringing his insight from serving as a leader in the Forensic Science Laboratory, as well as his role now in IT, and sharing how his experience can translate between different professions. So we welcome Ryan.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ryan Larison, obviously, and I currently work for MSP as an assistant director for our IT division. I had a 20-year career in forensic science and finished as an assistant system director and quality assurance manager for our 7-lab system. So let me share something insightful with you. Everybody handles pressure in forensic science differently, but I can tell you that my stress has significantly lessened in moving from forensic science to IT. My point is that forensic science is a really tough business. And I feel like we really need leaders who care about our scientists and can help them learn and grow to better handle the pressures that they're going to inevitably encounter. So this is a great webinar series. To me, it's a very important focus, and I'm really happy that Erin and RTI gave me an opportunity to touch on it with you. Okay, so technology is causing us to experience change at work more rapidly than we ever have before. And to succeed in this environment as leaders, we've got to be able to foster long-term excellence in our teams. An average lab team does consistently execute on solid forensic science work, but a high-performing one is also comfortable with change, and they don't experience upheaval from the challenges that come at them constantly. So today I'm going to first review transformational leadership. The prior speakers in the series have done a great job targeting key areas and tactics for this. I'm going to then cover some of the most important aspects of IT project implementation at the request of RTI, because that change process is probably alien to a lot of us. The presentation was originally going to delve further into agile methodology for software development, but because of time constraints and the fact that most of us won't be a part of that particular team in our work, I'll focus instead on the actual IT implementation process. So most of you probably heard of transformational leadership. If so, you'll remember that it differs from transactional leadership, which really gives little care to the human being in the work relationship. Transformational leadership is defined as the art of leading through inspiration, motivation, and personalized communication to consistently achieve exceptional performance. And as a leader, you can do this by creating a shared vision and a purpose and empowering your individual teammates to reach their full human potential. In 2012, I'd been in leadership training with MSP, and it was heavy on transformational leadership and piqued my interest. And during the final week of that training, I was promoted 2 steps from scientist to lab director. I then learned that my lab was going to be asked to carry a really heavy load for the governor's Secure Cities program in Flint and Saginaw by taking over crime scene responsibilities in those cities. So our after hours and overtime workload was going to double at a lab that was already worked harder than any other lab in the state. My system director came up to me in the hallway after one of our first meetings, and he said, "I hear you have a big challenge coming up for your lab due to the Secure Cities initiative." And he then said, "Ryan, I think this is a huge opportunity for your lab and your scientists, and you should approach it from that angle." And then he walked away. That really planted a seed, and I realized that everything I'd learned about transformational leadership could be applied as a fertile soil to help demonstrate and grow those opportunities for my team. And over time, I can't take credit for how well that lab did, because honestly, my staff and my supervisors were transformational themselves. They practiced this, but over time, practicing it in the lab resulted in team excellence and fantastic growth for my staff. The labs continually recognized through our engagement surveys and their everyday work behavior for having the highest engagement and change flexibility in the division. Most of the employees that remain there, they're all transformational leaders in their own right. So if you want your staff to behave in a flexible and transformative way, you have to continually reflect upon what your vision and expectations are. And then you've got to help them learn how to get there when they get stuck. You accomplish this through consistently applying the 4 I's of transformational leadership. If nothing else, if you begin here by considering how the 4 I's can help you in a situation with an individual or the team, you'll be well served. Each of the I's is an overall strategy that serves the person, but benefits the team and the goal. Your tactics might differ, but I invite you to watch the prior presentations in this series to learn about those tactics that other directors have shared with you. My chief tactic for transformational leadership in every situation is always to start with the thought, how can I help this individual or this unit or this team grow in this moment? This means that a lot of the 4 I's for me, individualized consideration tends to be the most important. It's not about coddling staff, though. It's about accountability towards their personal growth in how they interact positively with others in their life. So if you've ever heard the phrase, the highest form of compassion is accountability, you'll understand what I'm saying there. One example that's recent for me as an employee I'll call James. I recognized that my new division in IT had quite a few people that struggled with closed or inward mindsets. And I recently put on a 1-hour training session for my division concerning the importance of having those type of mindsets. In the training, I spoke about mindfulness tactics that each of them could use to improve their work and personal life. In one section of the training, I had stressed the importance of being able to create space during a stressful interpersonal moment. And creating space is where you're able to pause and create space and time and give yourself a chance to absorb and not react, right? James had earlier in the year lost his temper when he saw an email that offended him, and he ended up blowing up and sending a nasty reply email to a command officer from another division, which damages us, right? He got in trouble for it, and yet he didn't really seem to change. After the training, James came to me about 2 weeks later and he said, hey, I had a similar thing happen and I did what you had talked about and I created space. And he said it worked for me. It made it better. And he asked for a book that talked about some of those tactics. So that's growth, right? That's what we're talking about here. And this is huge when you consider that most of our staff are going to serve for over 30 years in a laboratory. If we don't help them grow, they're never going to, right? So a transformational leader will continually help their staff become stronger people. What transformational leadership is about is actively showing people how to be and how to relate so they can comfortably do anything that's needed. Cheryl talked about managing employee fear and wellness, and Tim talked about helping staff learn to communicate effectively in a culture of accountability. Jeremy talked about the DISC tool for facilitating understanding amongst staff for better team cohesion and effectiveness, and Jen is later going to talk about building a transformative team. These are leaders who facilitate, exemplify, and demand beliefs and behaviors that lead to constant growth and flexibility within their teams. One can expect that transformational leaders like them will not only build, but they're going to maintain teams that are successful even when they're challenged heavily. I'm sharing a Tuckman diagram in this slide. So a transformational team that's comfortable with change and has the right traits are always going to manage to stay in or near a high performing part of that curve. And I really believe that. And they're going to recover more quickly than other teams when they encounter changes in leadership or composition or work dynamics. So if scientists are honest, the worst 2 things that they can experience at work is being wrong or experiencing a significant process failure where a lot of work's brought into question. This creates an enormous amount of stress, which I would call egocentric stress, meaning it affects them personally, right? So they have sensitivity to change. Every change in a lab is negatively influenced by employee egocentric stress, everything. It's important for you to remember, especially if you're a leader. When scientists are agitated by or resistant to change, remember they're scared of something. And if you approach them from that angle, it really helps. Egocentric stress is physical and emotional stress that comes on when we only consider how a stressor is going to affect us personally. And for many of our scientists, whether we know it or not, they're internally catastrophizing a lot. The best thing we can do for our staff is to empower them by teaching them to self-manage their current future fears through effective and healthy mindsets. And the biggest gift I can give my staff in the long-term effectiveness of my organization is a gift of learning how to handle their fears at work. That way they can always contribute in a transformative and courageous and flexible way, especially my managers, because if they understand how to do this, they can help their smaller teams do the same thing. So in closing this brief section, which really doesn't do transformational leadership justice in 10 minutes, I just want to encourage you to always think about your lab's management problems from a human perspective first. What are people fearful of and how can you lead them past it? You'll always be transformational if you lead with that first and foremost. So let's talk about the people and the process for IT product implementation. This is something that was new to me, but IT product implementation is kind of a science of its own. It's definitely process oriented, like lab work. Wherever you work, there exists a process for bringing software or hardware from purchase to what we call go live. And that's called product implementation. So the players in project implementation, you can see those on this slide. Project manager is a person within your organization or provided by the vendor who's trained and experienced in IT implementation. They've got to be able to provide timelines, guidance, facilitation, and foresee a lot of your requirements. Formal project managers typically have what's called a PMP certification, and that's pretty common. The next one is probably you. It's the business owner. So if you take on a role where you are representing the business for the product implementation, you're going to be the business owner and you're the person representing that unit. You got to be able to work with the vendor and the implementation team to define requirements, gather subject matter experts and participants, and understand how that product's going to redefine your business. And you have to be fully engaged in that process from beginning to end. Next one is executive sponsor. Executive sponsor is typically a person who is at a higher level than you are. If you're the business owner, they're in your organization. They're going to monitor overall implementation from afar, and they're going to remove roadblocks or facilitate better collaboration or facilitation should your project falter. So as the business owner representing, you're going to be involved in the project itself fairly deeply. And if you run into problems, you've got to have somebody to contact in your organization to help you out. So it's important to make sure that there's a person recognized as an executive sponsor with your organization. And then subject matter experts, we're all familiar with these, but if you're the business owner, you'd be smart, right, to choose competent individuals who are respected by your staff for that position. And if you have multiple sites, you should probably have subject matter experts from all sites. That comes into play into testing, right? Because when you later start testing the product before fully implementing it, you want to have those experienced people across your different units, sections, and labs. Then vendor frequently has a project manager of their own, like I said earlier, or they'll have a vendor implementation team there to help you. And that depends on the project complexity or how they typically handle their customers. And they'll usually be upfront with you about how that's going to work. Finally, a couple of things I'm going to just quickly talk about. There's another process that goes along on the side while you're doing the project implementation, and that is security work, right? So authority to operate is ATO, and ATO process is required by FBI CJIS rules. So if your lab is passing across a network, personal information or restricted criminal information, you have to have this security work done. So typically that's done by both IT security specialists in your organization, whether it's a state or the county or the city. And then there's architecture team members too. Sometimes it's the same team, but they have to make sure the architecture is secure and the software itself and how it passes that data is secure. So that goes on outside of your project implementation team. And then finally, there's some extras that you may actually be lucky enough to have as part of your implementation team. And those are business analysts and testing analysts. So these might be folks who all they do every day at work is analyze requirements for a specific project that's coming on, or they actually analyze the testing requirements and facilitate a testing plan for your subject matter experts. And that's nice to have, but not everybody has that. So as a business owner, if you are, which some of you during your career, if you haven't already, you're going to be a business owner in a project implementation, the things that you can control, right? The items in light blue relate directly to transformational leadership, and those are ensuring clear communication without fear of conflict, choosing the right people for the right seats on the bus, helping others deal with fear of change, right? Because software implementation is change, and it's going to change your process. I think a lot of us understand that working in the lab that sometimes the software actually is what drives our process, not the other way around, which it creates a lot of problems and stress in people, especially when it's new. And then the last thing is defining the requirements completely and thoughtfully. And for the rest of this presentation, you're going to hear a lot about requirements because they are oh so important for you. So project implementation has steps, and typically, depending on the type of product, you'll spend some time longer or shorter at each step, but you typically have initiation and planning. The project manager will typically take over at this point, help form the team, create the plan, and get milestones. They'll start facilitating the defining of requirements with you and your team, and then assigning responsibilities for the whole project. There's also a development and testing section where there's, scenario writing, quality assurance testing, and user acceptance testing. That user acceptance testing is what your folks will do. The quality assurance testing is typically what the company will do once they actually do like loading of all of your data and that type of stuff. And finally, you have training. You have to have a training plan. And typically, you don't want to go into your project completion without having a training plan. Your staff typically demand that. And if you don't have it, it's going to look bad. It's going to feel bad, right? So you want to reduce that stress by having a good training plan. And then prepare for go live. Have a date, make sure everything's ready, your T's are crossed, your I's are dotted. And we call deployment go live. That's our go live date. We typically identify a date when we're going to go live. And that way staff know it's coming and we're ready for it. And then after that, your maintenance schedule will begin. Maintenance schedule is, maybe updates that are done on your product. And then every year you're going to have more expenses. You need to track those expenses and make sure that you're aware that you've got to pay the company every year to keep that thing updated. In yellow, they're defining business requirements. This is the most important step for every IT implementation process, and it's probably the most common reason that you're going to fail. So you have to do a great job at accurately defining what your requirements for that software are. What do you need it to do? ATO security process, authority to operate, as I mentioned, is your internal security determination. You've got to follow those FBI CJIS rules. And for this process, that IT security team is going to work directly with the vendor. Vendors can also provide a third-party report for you that helps that security team answer a lot of their questions that they have to put into writing. So most projects experience trouble because of business requirements, which in this case, again, is what the lab wants the project or product to actually do and how they want the product to do it, are not fully discovered and defined. So essentially, they're not explored thoroughly enough. So here's a great example. We at MSP recently had a development meeting for a bespoke product, which is a ground up, just built for us application. And the vendor was demonstrating the final version of the Troopers daily activity log where they have to enter all of their activity. And the vendor project's been going on for almost 3 years, and it's now 1 year past go live. So we are really late on this. It's been difficult. They took 3 minutes in the demo to enter the Troopers information for their shift, which was like their equipment loadout. And they had no button to preload a prior shift's loadout. So take 3 minutes times 1,500 troopers every shift for a year. And that's a lot of lost time, right? If you think of it from that perspective. And I said, did you guys consider doing a loadout button where it just basically re-enters their previous shift's equipment? And they said, no, we didn't. And that took 2 weeks of reprogramming to basically get that product ability. So if they would have defined that requirement very thoroughly 3 years earlier, we wouldn't have had to waste 2 weeks, if that makes sense. So testing, business requirements are the most likely area to contribute to failure, but testing is close behind. It's important to put together a testing plan, okay? It doesn't matter if you have a commercial off-the-shelf product or not. You got to be able to use the product to determine if any of the tools don't work for you. If it's in development, you got to communicate back and forth with the development team to refine that product, because the developers don't know what your business really does in a lot of cases. And if it's a commercial off-the-shelf product, you still need to know what the product can't do for you, so you'll be able to alter your procedures or process to accommodate that. And how many of us have noticed in this day and age that our software frequently drives our process, right? It's not the other way around. So you need to have a testing plan in place prior to the vendor delivering a usable product, and you've got to identify subject matter experts for that testing. And the opportunity does lie in the fact that you can select peer leaders who are comfortable with change, these early adopters, and those people are the ones you really would want to be a part of that testing process. So strategically, they can make that transition easier for your lab or system and practice, and psychologically too, because they can increase everybody else's confidence and more quickly develop your product aptitude in your units. Finally, share with you, a lot of us have done cause mapping if we're quality assurance folks in the lab. This is the largest cause map I've ever done, and I came over to IT this last year and we had 3 failed go lives. And everybody was prepared to move on without fixes, right? And I said, hey guys, don't you want to find out what went wrong? So 28 solutions came out of this cause map, and we're currently implementing a whole bunch of those. So don't think for a second that your lab abilities and your quality assurance things don't translate into other areas. They really do. So in this cause map, I will say there are some transformational leadership opportunities as well. And a lot of those are fear of conflict, because we slap these teams together and these teams don't always see eye to eye. They're basically forming and storming, and they're not at that high performing level. So finally, if you haven't already, some tips: commit to practicing transformational leadership now. Keep it simple. Fill in your transformational leadership gaps by studying books or trainings around the concept of open or outward or growth mindsets, and stay consistent. Stick to the 4 I's. For better tactics, because transformational leadership is a strategy, it's a greater strategy, but for better tactics, read books like Leadership and Self-Deception and The Outward Mindset by Arbinger. 5 Dysfunctions of Teams by Patrick Lencioni is a great one. Mindset or Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck. And then, if you're into Eastern philosophy, a great one that I've read recently is Inner Engineering by Sadhguru. Great book for that. And then share this stuff with others. Learn how to help yourself and then help your teammates towards these truths, okay? Understand that for IT improvements, you got to put your vision or the organizational vision out there, continually demonstrate, if you're a leader, a business owner, administrative courage, and encourage those around you towards that goal. Follow the behaviors outlined in this webinar series by other presenters. Provide idealized influence through your own behavior, and encourage your team towards flexibility and comfort with change, because that's the ultimate goal, right? And then requirements. Don't fail at clearly discovering and defining your requirements early in any IT project process. And then finally, trust your project team to succeed, but closely monitor and affect the things you can as the business owner or executive sponsor. Outline a testing plan as the project leader. And as it proceeds through development, hopefully the staff and testing team and subject matter experts will tackle it with positivity from your available work sites or units. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Erin, and appreciate the opportunity today.
Thank you, Ryan. Everyone, if you have any questions, please add those into the Q&A chat pod. Ryan, I just wanted to talk a little bit about a word that you used a lot during this presentation, and that's the word practice. You talked about how important it is to practice this transformational leadership, or whatever leadership style that you identify with. And how would you suggest to those in the labs who are usually maybe one person doing 5 people's jobs, like how do you end up bringing that leadership piece into your practice, if you will?
Yeah, so the number one thing is you can't teach until you know, right? You have to educate yourself, and I think that's the biggest piece. When you learn about transformational leadership and you learn about a lot of these tactics by reading, going to training, you're going to become confident with it, and you're going to be able to see other people's problems more clearly. So, a good example, I had a manager come into my office. This is an equivalent of a lab director. And this is actually yesterday, and she was really struggling with another manager peer over something that was really important to both of them. And it's an opportunity right there to help that person grow. So I had experienced that before, and I'd done the legwork, done the work to learn how to handle that. And when you're in that position, that's when you're able to help. So that's why I'd invite everybody to start that journey now. If you're not a leader yet in your organization, maybe you will be one day. Even if you aren't, you're going to learn how to handle those situations. And it goes past just work. It goes into your personal life with your family, your kids, all those things too.
And we've talked a little bit before about practice doesn't mean that you're always good at it, just like a sport, right? It doesn't mean it comes naturally, and we learn from our mistakes as well.
Right. This is good stuff. It's not easy. It's not easy to do, but if you're really into it and you have discipline and you recognize that you're going to do great.
And the other thing you said is you talked about accountability, and sometimes I think that word has a negative connotation, but you kind of had a positive spin on it. Can you talk a little bit about why you think accountability is positive, both in the short term and the long term for a lab?
Yeah, accountability to your behavior is huge. And if your organization doesn't attend to these things across, all of your business areas, again, I mentioned earlier, 30 years we'll have employees in state government. So the opportunity is the earliest we can teach people and grow them in these areas, the better. I think this is the biggest untapped resource that we have in most organizations. So, you have to recognize it. I think, our department is currently doing a lot more training. We have our own training division now that is doing a lot of mindset work, which I think is going to pay massive dividends down the road. So recognizing that and then recognizing when people need it, it's a big thing.
And we have a question about the books, and to write those in the chat, but right now, could you just go over what those are again so maybe people can jot them down?
Yeah, absolutely. So my favorite starting point is Leadership and Self-Deception, and that's by the Arbinger Foundation. You can get those books free at some conferences, but it's a great book. It's a great start. The other one they provide that's good is Outward Mindset. I really like that one. Another one is Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck, Dweck. The Five Dysfunctions of Teams by Patrick Lencioni. And then the other one is Inner Engineering by Sadhguru, Sahdguru. That's more of an Eastern philosophy or spiritual look. But one thing that's really interesting about all of these things, they're different takes on the same subject. So it doesn't really matter what you read as long as you're reading on these things. Some are Western philosophy or Western psychology based, or most of them. But some of the Eastern stuff, they've been studying people for 2,000 plus years, right? So the Eastern philosophies really reflect the same truths.
And moving over into the project management concepts, and you specifically talked about software, I think people could relate to implementing limbs or changes to limbs. You don't think of everything when you're developing stuff, and sometimes it's just because you've run into a situation, that you go back. But what have you thought is like the most useful tip to try to either bring on new software or like a validation? Is it the right people? Is it the performance criteria, or maybe a mix of both?
It's all of it. If you look at the prior sessions we've had, putting the right people in the right seats on the bus, ensuring that people can communicate and accept some conflict and have good communication even when it's hard. All of those pieces together really are what make a great project implementation. But in the beginning, being as thorough as you can early in the process, being a good business owner and working really hard to make sure that your team is thorough in their investigation of that product is huge.
And it sounds like you've also drawn from other industries to, from forensics and from IT, just seeing how these concepts can translate. Have you done reading about other industries as well, just to inspire you in where you are now or when you were in forensics?
Yeah, so it took me about 18 months to get really comfortable with IT implementation, if that tells you anything. They have their own lingo, their own acronyms, and it's a lot. So, but most industries share this common framework for bringing on technology. Agile methodology that we didn't talk about, that's a very, very specific kind of scientifically developed process that they use to actually produce technology and produce software projects. It's a really interesting field when you look at it from that perspective. There's a lot out there.
Well, thank you, Ryan. We are at the end of our time together, but we really appreciate your presentation. And for those attendees, we appreciate you being here as well. If you have any questions for Ryan that we weren't able to get to today, please feel free to email him at this contact information. And we appreciate your feedback as well on the survey that you will be provided. Thanks so much.